Hey all, welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. With us today is Richard Gilliver from Skeptic Takeout and Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me. Today, Richard Gill is unable to join us, so we have with us not one, but two amazing special guests. We have Ascalon, who is one of our lovely ACA compatriots, friends, and Kyle Brewer from, Kyle Brewer, a YouTube channel where he produces short and engaging videos on science topics. Today, we are going to be discussing astrology. And remember, we do zero prep for this show. So the less we know about this topic, the better. And today specifically, it's going to be on the side of the less. So grab your English tea or your trendy coffee of choice and join us today as we discuss that thing where you read in the newspaper about some stuff based on the stars and the month you were born or something like that. Anyway, while our super catchy music is playing, don't forget to take a moment to like the episode and subscribe so that you can catch all of our future shows. You can also hit that reminder button on whichever platform you use so that you can be notified as soon as the episode is released. This is episode 35, Astrology. All right, gentlemen, astrology, and we're missing our third. So this is going to be a fun and interesting dynamic. And I don't even know where to get started on this one.
In the sky. That's a pretty good place to start for astrology, isn't it? Or in the minds of wizards and witches who predict the future, and I'm going to get slaughtered by the pagan community for that.
Yeah, no, honestly, like the only thing I know about astrology, and it has nothing to do about where it came from. I have no clue, like who produced it, where it comes from, but I do know that it's all about charts of the sky and how it relates to your birthday and how it relates to predicting what is going to be happening in your life. That's about as far as I got. Ask one. What about you? What do you know?
Well, I kind of disagree with Richard already. It doesn't start in the sky; it starts in the toilet. It's
I like it.
really just a lot of crap. It's I couldn't tell you exactly when it was first invented or discovered or thought up or whatever, but it was long enough ago that all the planets are either in a different rotation or far enough apart that the charts are absolutely meaningless now. So I've honestly no idea why people put so much stock in it.
Well, and from my understanding, it's become, I mean, maybe it was always this complex, but from my understanding, it's become really complex where they pull out these charts of what I'm presuming is today's sky, but they do all these calculations. And like I've seen, I think it was a Penn and Teller's bullshit actually, which makes it so much more appropriate. On astrology, where the woman that they were talking to had this book and she had all these papers spread out in front of her, and she was doing all these complex calculations to determine different facts about whoever it was that she was reading. And it looked like it's kind of becoming almost somewhat of a pseudoscience more than just like a hobby.
Do you think that's because it has to be, though? Because the kind of basic kind of, oh, I'm going to read a bit of shit in the newspaper is not selling. So to continue selling it for these people, it has to move with the times and get more complicated.
It kind of seems like religion has to be that same way too. Yeah, where the more that science sort of uncovers these truths about our reality, the more that these other cultural phenomena need to kind of adapt and pick up from where science is, and they need to fill in the gaps of where there's still mystery, right? So it's almost like a necessity these days to have some sort of scientific relevancy. And I'm saying that for those of you on the podcast, it's in air quotes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people cling to this kind of thing because they want that mystery, you know, in that mysterious aspect in their life, that sense of like, oh, you know, there's more going on than what meets the eye.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that science and the uncovering of these mysteries like takes something away from their life, which I completely disagree with.
I'm right there with you. Like when I was religious, I definitely felt that way. I felt that sort of transcendent, I'm gonna throw out big words, like transcendent existential experience of something beyond myself, beyond my comprehension. And I thought it was so necessary in my life to have that feeling. But when I started learning more about science, that feeling sticks, but you're at awe or in awe over things that actually exist and are tangible and measurable, and things that you can discuss, like the vastness of the universe, which Kyle, I know we're going to get into for the next episode. Um, but or like how different chemical reactions work, or different creatures and their abilities, right? Like the axolotl. You get that same feeling of transcendence, but when you're in that spiritual world or in that spiritual sort of mindset, you feel like that's something necessary to have in your life. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
No, I've never really been religious or superstitious or anything. It's just that, like you said, I find it more amazing that there's a moon somewhere in the solar system that's made of diamonds rather than Saturn somehow is going to affect my digestion on Thursday.
You're right. I mean, yeah, what is it about needing to know our future or what's going to happen that is so appealing to us? Why do we have as a species such a need to kind of predict what's going to be happening next?
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of a crossover here because I'm currently, well, just finished writing some notes for another show that me and Laura are going to be on, which I'm sure we'll advertise later on in this show. And one of the articles we're discussing on that is predicting the future in general. And I feel like I want to lean heavily on what I wrote about that here, because it's a perfect example of like how bad the human brain is, and how people put aside skepticism when it comes to certain things. It's very easy to think that something, someone could come along and say, I'm going to use the stars to predict your future. And they can say you're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome stranger who's going to make you very happy. But that's incredibly fucking vague. Incredibly vague. And it doesn't take much to, once that suggestion's been put to you, to kind of go forward and start filling in the blanks when things start happening to you. And that to me is how prediction works in general. Nothing's super specific. And
Right.
as astrology, it's been used. It's not just. I mean, I think, did it come from the ancient Greece when it first started getting popular? They used astrology, and it was a science back then. It was considered a science, but it wasn't just then. The ancient Chinese used it as well, and Hindus used it. But it wasn't the only form of bullshit in those cultures either. I mean, if you I've got somewhere a copy of my famous bookshelf, the I Ching, which is another kind of prophetic system in China.
Huh.
And they, cultures have these different forms of things in slightly different forms, slightly different variations, and they've had them for a long time. But we should be beyond now. We should have enough critical thinking now that we can assess the bullshit claim in it. And, we can see that, you're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome stranger. Doesn't mean a fucking thing in today's society. And, what is that all they predict? I don't know. I'm not au fait enough with astrology to know the ins and outs of it. Does it get more complicated than that?
It does, from my understanding, but at the same time, you strike on a really good point, which is, well, 2 points. One is the vagueness, but then what you were saying kind of reminded me of the idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So you can say like, you are going to be successful or have a new venture put in front of you, like individuals have new opportunities go by them probably like multiple times throughout a day or a week or a month, right? But are you paying attention to those opportunities? Like you might just be saying no to them or dismissing them, or they might not be right for you, and then suddenly you read this fortune cookie or get this horoscope or whatever, and then suddenly you're like, ooh, this new opportunity just came on my like in front of me, but the fortune said it was going to. So then now you're reinforcing that fortune had any sort of relevance, but it would have anyway, one way or another, right? Whether you read that fortune or not, whether you got that horoscope or not. And when it's a opportunity that you're just going to dismiss anyway. So in other words, like, okay, so an opportunity comes in front of you and then it reinforces that thing has some truth, but then you just choose not to take that opportunity. Well, now it's what is it called when you're counting the hits and not the misses?
Mhm. Like, kind of like
Something
confirmation bias.
bias. Yeah, yeah. It's is it confirmation bias or
Are you
positive
talking
bias
about
or-
the Texas sharpshooter fallacy?
where you
Where
where you draw that
With-
that's even another one where that's the one where you draw the bullseye around the bullet hole, right?
Yeah.
That's another one. What I'm talking about is more like you have the hits and the misses, but you're only counting the hits in order to validate that it's the truth, right?
Right.
So you or you're recognizing, okay, opportunities come my way all the time, but I'm only going to recognize this one opportunity because that's the one that happened immediately following my horoscope. Or that's the guy I met immediately following my horoscope. Never mind the 10 guys I've met at coffee shops or in passing or whatever prior to it. I think that's what Richard's trying to say, right? So part of it is that confirmation bias, but part of it also is the self-fulfilling prophecy, where maybe you start to go out and look for or pay more attention to these things. And then when you do see it, you're like, oh, holy shit. Like it was right.
Well, yeah, because you've been primed by having this thing given to you to start with, and once you're primed, your mind starts doing all sorts of wonderful and exotic things with that information. So I'm really interested. Have any of you guys kind of either yourself or someone close to you or someone who you know, like kind of really been influenced or taken in by the astrology and what they've read it, whether it's reading it in the newspapers or going to see somebody in person to have your stars read?
Well, I have a friend who he believes it enough to get the tattoo of his star sign. Um, he doesn't really push it on anybody. He just kind of talks about it like this is how it works in my life, and I'm not saying this is how it's going to work for you because it works for everyone differently, which I find weird. Like if it works differently for everybody, how can you nail down the mechanism behind it?
Yeah, the actual truth claim versus no. And so he actually believes that horoscopes do contain a measure of
Yes.
truth, or at least certain horoscopes, maybe.
Has he attributed anything to that, and any kind of success in his life, or any or negative influence or whatever?
I'm not entirely sure. It would be something I would be up for asking him about.
Yeah, so it's interesting when people say something like that, like, well, it's true for me, or I have my own version of the truth, and other people have different versions. Like, I kind of wonder how that justification works, and that's kind of separate from the astrology topic per se. But it's interesting to me that if you're convinced that something is the truth and that it works for you and that it would work for other people, I don't know. I'm kind of curious, like if there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there in his head where it's like, I kind of believe it, but I kind of know that it could be bullshit, or if he just really legitimately doesn't care about other people, like, I don't know. If something was actually true, wouldn't you want to be spreading it around like wildfire?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people don't feel that way. They feel like that comfort dwarfs truth.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so maybe for him, pursuing astrology or reading his horoscope or whatever it is that he does might bring him a specific level of comfort that he knows
Right.
doesn't apply to everybody. That's interesting.
Well, about you, Ascalon, have you ever come across anybody or had any kind of experience yourself with it?
I've seen a lot of people selling obviously their MacGuffins at craft fairs and things like that, and I remember having one lady try and tell me that it's because it's some sort of Eastern mysticism thing. I did look into this at some point years ago. The zodiac itself is, I think, I'm not entirely sure. Someone will need to correct me. I think it's based on the Chinese calendar.
I think so.
And I'm sure they found like an astrology board as far back as like 2,500 years ago. So like Babylonian type things, which basically just gave this woman all the ammunition she needed to peddle her shit to people. Oh, look, it's old. It's older than the hills.
So that's another. Yeah, I love that fallacy. That it's been around forever, therefore it's true fallacy.
So I mean, you may not know, but was she saying that it actually come from the Eastern kind of astrology, or do you think that there'd been a Western or a Middle Eastern astrology and Far Eastern astrology that had grown up parallel to each other, which had got amalgamated?
I've honestly no idea. I mean, in its modern form, it could have come from fucking anywhere. To be honest, there could be bits in here from Indian mysticism, from Western philosophy. There could be fucking anything in it. You know?
I suspect that's probably the case, because I've had in my long and colourful past, I've had a lot to do with kind of a lot of New Age people, and they do tend to. I think, from what I can remember, there was a thing that, like, around the 50s and 60s, where a lot of these people who started, like, being people in the New Age movement in the 60s and 70s were reading stuff from people from the like 40s, 50s, 60s, and that influenced them, and they were reading genuine interpretations of, you know, stuff from the Far East or stuff from the Middle East, and then they were kind of bringing that in and amalgamating it together, mixing it all up. And so I do suspect Ascalon, even though I don't know this, I do suspect Ascalon is actually right in the respect that in the modern form, it's a very convoluted and mixed bag of stuff, which has probably formed into its own school of something with its own rules and values.
Yeah, so that is one place where I am comfortable speaking, where I do know a little bit. Having an anthropological background is cultural diffusion, right? Which basically just means the sharing of ideas, right? You have two different cultures with different ideas, and as those cultures are exposed to each other, those ideas diffuse from one culture into another. So it's not the same as appropriation, where a culture sort of takes something and tries to own it. It's a little bit more subtle than that, and it's a little bit more innocent than that, where just ideas kind of get shared and mixed around. But the thing with diffusion is that you don't always get like a complete package where it's like, okay, so from Chinese ancient lore or from Middle Eastern ancient lore, here's this complete package. It's more just like, here's an idea from here and an idea from there. And because we have such a mixed culture now, or a mixed world, where we do have a lot of exposure to different cultures, even back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, like there was a lot of mixing of ideas already. And so those ideas, they start to get sort of watered down, but they also, their exact sources sort of start to get fuzzy and mixed and hard to locate. So I do agree with you. Like there's a lot that you can take from ancient Chinese lore in terms of astrology, but all these other ideas get mixed in with it. And I would be willing to bet, although I haven't studied astrology in any sort of formal way, I'd be willing to bet that you could pick out some of the stuff that comes from different ancient sources, but that there's a lot of other stuff too that's been like added to it or mixed in with it, that now make it kind of its own unique beast.
Yeah, and I know that in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot a lot about astrology. It's a big part of that. It's one aspect of Tibetan Buddhism that I never really looked into, because I'm more interested in the scriptural side of things. So it kind of bypassed me. But I am aware that it had a big thing, and that was also kind of Tibet came to kind of the knowledge of the rest of the world as an entity and its traditions and things around the same time that these early New Age writers were, getting their stuff 30s and 40s. Before that, Tibet was unknown to the rest of the world, and then as it started amalgamating, that's when it started kind of, Shangri-La was believed to be in Tibet, that mystical kind of Eastern paradise, and it makes sense that a lot of those ideas will have come through at that time. So although I know nothing about Tibetan Buddhism and couldn't give you any particular aspects of it, it wouldn't surprise me if you were to find aspects of that in modern astrology.
There would be, I would think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there's a lot of. I don't want to use the word chakras because I know it's a different sort of thing, but like spiritual energy and magneticism and whatever. I don't understand how people got from that to, it'll spin your chakras faster, it'll make you feel a bit better, to actually having a physical difference on your life.
Yeah, that would be interesting to figure out how it all morphs over time. But what I'm more interested in, I know we have to go to a commercial break now because we're coming up on that time in the show. But when we get back, it'd be kind of interesting to go over what modern day astrology looks like from our perspectives. Now, this is for people who don't study it, don't know a lot about it, but we're exposed to it through cultural, just day-to-day interactions. And so I kind of want to get into discussing how it manifests today in our world and how it impacts those who believe and those who don't believe. But for now, we're going to go ahead and take a break and go to commercial.
So, what you may have noticed, Ascalon's disappeared. He will be back with us after commercials. What have we got coming on? Well, I can tell you for a fact that something very, very special is happening soon. And that is us two, myself and Miss Unapologetically Me, are going to be on the non-profits together for the first time this coming
This should
Sunday.
have happened ages ago. What the
I'm
hell?
so excited about this because
Wonderful.
outside,
Yeah.
aside from doing something on Oz's channel, like way back at the start of this year,
That was a
when
panel of a lot of people too.
yeah, and we were kind of we were both very new in advertising our own channels. We've other than this, we've not done anything together. And we've been scheduled to do the perspective, and through certain things that's not worked out. So we're finally getting to work together, and we'll be on there, the non-profits, this Sunday. Don't miss it. And I've also got to add, before we jump into it, seeing what else Laura's doing. Upcoming, not quite yet. You've still got a bit of time, so we might have a time to remind you a little bit before that. My channel, Skeptic Hangout, get the right name, is coming up to its first year anniversary.
Yes.
So the brilliant Ethan Michael is producing a live show, the first live show I've done to celebrate that. And there's going to be some awesome guests, including these two and Ascalon. They were looking forward to that. We're going to have, I can't go through everyone. There's too many people that, Cynthia McDonald, Jenna Mew, so many awesome guests, people I absolutely love. So I'm going to be celebrating my channel's first birthday on the 1st of November at 8 p.m. Central. So that's a Monday.
So set your reminders. Go on to Skeptic Takeout and set the reminder. That's Takeout, not Hangout. Although we can put a reminder up on Hangout as well.
Join us, come and help celebrate with me, and we're going to be talking about my show and what we've been doing on my show in the past year. And I'm going to be talking about what fucking amazing people I'm having on my show are doing as well, because without these guys, without Kyle and Laura and everyone else who's going on there, Cynthia, there would be no my show, because it's those people who've helped propel me along. So don't forget about that. Laura, what are you up to other than the non-profits?
Awesome. So I did want to throw out the date for the non-profits. It'll be premiering on the 24th. So that is this Sunday, but if you're listening later on, then it's probably in the past. I do have some work coming up in November with the Promethean Secular Frontier, and then also with Jenna Mew and her channel. And we're going to be doing some parenting talk on that one.
Yes, we are. I'm doing that with you. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, but I don't have dates nailed down yet. So we're working on doing some monthly stuff for that. And then I'm also going to be appearing a little bit more regularly on the Promethean Secular Frontier, but we haven't worked out those dates yet. So that will be coming up, but just letting you guys know what's out on the horizon. And then I do have the Veterans Day episode of Non-Profits. It's going to be myself and then other veterans who are either currently serving or who have served, but are working specifically with the ACA. So we took ACA people, and we're going to do a special Veterans Day episode. So that's what I've got coming up. Kyle, what have you got going on? Let's shell your channel for a little bit. Let's get your stuff out there.
Right on. Well, I've got a few ideas floating around. I know that my upload schedule is very erratic. It's kind of just whenever I feel like making a video, or if I have the time. Current video I'm working on right now is about comets, how they form, near Earth objects, that kind of thing.
Nice.
In fact, our mutual friend Secular Rarity suggested this one, so this one goes out to him. Other than that, I'm just kind of playing by ear.
Yep, and you volunteer a lot with the ACA, so there's that going on.
Yep, I mod the ACA Facebook pages, which everybody should join, as long as you follow the rules. That's a big one there.
He's bad
yeah.
cop.
No, I am so not. That is your job, Richard.
So I've got to play Kyle up a little bit. Like his channel is really very impressive, especially for being a new channel.
I second that.
I like the way that you've kickstarted it and the way you've got it going. They're very short videos, so you don't have to spend a lot of time digesting these topics, but they're advanced topics. Like he did one on the size of space that I thought was really, really good. But he presents it in such a way that as an adult you can learn something. But also I use it for my kids for homeschooling. Like that's how impressed I am at him. Like I use a lot of YouTube in general to introduce ideas to the kids that they can take in an engaging way, and not just be bored reading textbooks. So I've actually added Kyle's channel to my list of YouTube resources for the kids because they're short, they're engaging, they're comprehensive, and if the kids do have any questions, we could just use that as sort of like a sounding board to like go off and look at more videos to get more answers, and look at things more in depth. But they're quick little sciencey videos, but they're really cool. And Kyle's voice when he's recording, super awesome. I love the way he sounds.
Well, that's awesome. That's actually one of the things I was a little worried about, was how I'm going to present myself through just voice. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Definitely
so
go and check
out,
Kyle's
guys.
channel out. Yeah.
And remember, it's just Kyle Brewer. So we'll put a link in our description, and we'll have that available to you guys. But no fancy names to remember. Just look him up.
Yep. Should the first thing you'll see if you Google Kyle Brewer is actually my deconversion story. But just scroll down a little bit further, you'll find
it. It'll be there. And check out his deconversion story. You might be interested. Okay, so before we head back from commercials, the one thing that we wanted to remind you guys of is the Facebook page. One thing that we stress a lot in our shows is that we're not experts. We make a lot of mistakes. We're just talking off the cuff. We never do research. So there's things that we get wrong, and we like to point it out ourselves on the Facebook page, but we also have other people who catch stuff and point it out. I know that happened this week when there was a couple of corrections made that I really appreciate, and it generates more conversation. So head over to the Facebook page if you don't already, follow it, and then if you guys have any questions or catch anything that you want to sort of expand on or correct, go ahead and throw that up on our Facebook page. But it really helps us to keep these discussions going, so it's not just an hour of conversation between like 3 or 4 people. It's an ongoing conversation that kind of lasts throughout the week, and it brings you guys, our listeners, in, and that's been really enjoyable so far. So check it out, like it, follow it, and then yeah, feel free to just smash every single point we make in every single episode. Tell us how wrong we are.
One thing I've noticed as well is there's people going back who are like either old fans or new fans of the show, and the old fans who've not caught every episode, and they're going back and then they're coming and commenting weeks and weeks after the episode's aired on episodes that are like for us long in the past. So it's reinvigorating the conversation. I'm loving that. I think it's brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to head back from commercial break, but yeah, check us out on Facebook. So welcome back from commercial break, gentlemen. I had said that we're going to talk about modern day astrology, but while we were doing our little transition, I had a thought, and I'm going to actually put Kyle on the spot just a little bit here. Because you are really into astronomy and science, and a lot of your videos on your YouTube channel, they're all like astronomy related and space related. So I'm going to throw a question your way. From your perspective, being someone who's interested in space and interested in what we can and can't know about space, what do you think about astrology from sort of a amateur astronomer's perspective?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, you know, when I think of astrology, I think of how stars are supposed to impact our lives in some tangible way. It's a little weird for me because I know that stars are little more than balls of incandescent plasma that do very little more than explode and give off radiation. I don't see how something like that could have some sort of genuine meaning in someone's life other than just the scientific meaning behind the stars themselves. I don't see that spiritual aspect. See, it's a tough question. It's a tough question for a lot of reasons, but for me, I don't see how the positions of stars can influence anything about a person.
Does it kind of seem like it's holding on to an old idea? Like back when we weren't exactly sure what stars were, and there were just these things in the sky that seemed to be very relevant to us. Like they mapped our way,
Oh,
they
of
created these
course.
pictures. Like, I can kind of see why people who didn't know any better would kind of um give them mystic values, right?
Well,
Or
sure. I
attributes, I
mean,
should say.
we, ancient people had a much better view of the night sky than we currently do. Light pollution, which
Mhm.
is another good question. Why is astrology so prevalent in a world where we can barely see the night sky as it is?
Yeah, I
Uh,
didn't know until I was an adult that you could actually see the Milky Way. Like I had no idea that in
I, s-
certain
I s- I still haven't seen it. That's a goal of mine.
Oh my gosh, if you're ever in our neck of the woods, we have like my family owns property up in an area where it's so dark that you can get photographs of the Milky Way. It's gorgeous.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
I Ascalon might be interesting, worth asking him because he lives in an area in southwest Scotland. It's supposedly got the. I mean, I say supposedly, I've seen it. It is very clear. It has got the clearest. It's supposedly the best place in Britain to actually do kind of stargazing and astronomy from. And he lives not too far from there, so it might be worth interesting there asking I can't speak. Asking
I'm
Ascalon
definitely
when
not
he
cutting
gets
that
back.
out.
and out here where I live, on a clear dark night, you can see maybe 20, 30 stars
Oh my.
at best.
Wow.
It's not a lot.
See, that surprises me because I'm not from the US, obviously, and I just imagine everywhere in the US to be just big and wide open Texas skies.
You've got the cowboy image of the US. Yeah. No,
not quite, not quite.
Google Las Vegas or like Chicago, and that's like the majority. No. I mean, no, there's so it's hyperbole, of course, but there are a lot of wide open spaces. But even then, Kyle's right. There's a lot of light pollution, not just in the US, but throughout the world. We
Yeah.
produce a lot of manufactured light, and we rely on it for those like nighttime pursuits. And our night sky doesn't look anywhere near as clear as what the ancient people saw it as, like just in general. Yeah, there's a place, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a place out in Nevada that's the same way. It's so dark, and it's the place that has the least amount of light pollution. I don't know if it's on the West Coast or in all of the United States. I can't remember, but um that's a place that I've been wanting to take the kids to, like on a camping trip where we can do some amateur astronomy and just really see the sky from a different perspective. I think that would be amazing.
So, from the aspect of astrology, then rather than astronomy, what I don't know why I pronounce them like that.
Yeah, because it's hard to distinguish between the two.
Right, so if I've seen astronomers on the TV make predictions, and they go through, they use very kind of what you'd consider scientific astronomical language, like Mercury being in retrograde, which is an actual thing.
Right.
But what is? Do you think that they use that kind of language to try and legitimize it? Or do you think that they genuinely believe that it has some kind of predictive power?
I'm gonna let Kyle take this first because I have a response, but the whole like Mercury and retrograde thing, I think that's right up your alley, Kyle.
Believe it or not, I'm actually not entirely familiar with that, with what the term is or means. I've only heard it.
When one of the planets is in retrograde, it appears to be moving backwards in the sky, although it's not due to the position.
It's because of our orbits and how they relate to each other.
Yeah, it's just a perspective thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, again, this is tough because I know jack all about astrology.
Well, I'll just go ahead and take it then. Like, so we have two different things that are working here, right? So you have this sort of spiritual aspect of astrology where there's some sort of interconnectedness between ourselves and the planets and the stars and stuff. And then there's the actual physical movement of these objects in space. And so when you say something like Mercury is in retrograde, all you're really talking about is the movement of Mercury in relation to Earth's movement, right? You're talking about a physical phenomena. You're talking about
Okay.
just the way that it's moving through space and the way that it orbits around the sun. And so there's nothing spiritual or really interesting about it. It's just the way it looks in the sky. So when someone says Mercury's in retrograde, you're talking about Mercury moving. That's all you're talking about from an astronomical perspective. That's why you need to slow it down, Richard, just make sure you get it right. So from a scientific perspective, that's all you're talking about. But then when you get into astrology, the whole Mercury's in retrograde starts to take on this sort of mystic, spiritual, it kind of gives it additional meaning or additional depth, somewhat arbitrarily, like that the movement of Mercury in relation to us. And again, it's an optical illusion, really. Like it's still moving in the same direction. Mercury hasn't done anything special. It's just crossed our orbit in such a way that it appears to. And so now it's given this additional meaning somewhat out of the blue. And so it's interesting because yes, in answer to your question, Richard, I think that they are using the scientific term. I can't remember the question exactly that you asked. It was like, are they, I think what they're doing is they don't fully understand really what that means. Like they assign additional or different meaning to it than what it means to the scientific community. Right.
Yeah, I think the whole thing, the for me, astrology, the whole thing about astrology is and anything like that, not specifically astrology, is I'm really interested in how people move from something which in the ancient past, the stars, as we've said, were clear, everybody could see them, they were very important in people's lives for things like farming, for navigation. They had real influence and an actual effect on people's lives. They used them to predict things in a real predictive way.
Right.
To predict the seasons for planting, to predict where things were going to be when they were navigating. So I can see how the leap was made in ancient times. Mm-hmm. What interests me is the psychological continuation between that and now, where we don't need them. As one of you mentioned earlier about not even being able to see the stars anymore.
Right.
And yet people still believe in this stuff. And I love getting into the mechanisms of things, and it's that interests me. It always reminds me of this. I was once talking to somebody who, a friend of theirs, believed they could cast spells, and genuine like witch spells, which had an effect on people.
Legitimate, yeah.
And I asked them, about the mechanism, and they said, "Oh, it's when the moon's full." And I said, "Well, what is it about the moon being full that influences this?" And I were expecting some kind of answer about, well, psychologically, this, that, and other. And they actually said, "Oh, it's the position of the moon in the sky. When it gets into a certain position once every month, that's when it's prime." And when I pointed out that the moon's actually moving away from us, so the moon's in a completely different position anyway.
Every single month, yeah.
That's they kind of started getting a bit, and it became difficult to answer. And the mechanism, when you get down to the mechanisms of these things, that's when people start to stumble, because I don't think they've thought that deeply about it. They might have an arbitrary answer which satisfies most people,
right? And it sounds good typically.
It becomes quite difficult. And this is where I want the viewers, if any of you are into astrology or believe in astrology, or even if you don't believe in it but you know a little bit more about
understand it more, yeah,
I'd love you to pass on the information as to how it's supposed to work technically. That's really interesting to me. But what do we think about the I'll pass it on to you because I've been talking for ages. What do we think about the idea that in the past it had actual predictive value, and that being a psychological continuation to now.
It's funny, I was talking to my kids earlier today about tradition, right? And like because one of them popped off something sort of sarcastically about like, well, this is how it's always done. And I was like, oh, you're just being a traditionalist, right? And we were just teasing back and forth. And he understood the sarcasm of what he was saying. But the idea that when something becomes tradition, it starts to become accepted by future generations just based on the fact that it's like that's how it's always been done, or like what I can't remember who said it earlier, that it was like, oh, it's true because it's so old, right? I think it was Ascalon said something about that, like, oh, it's thousands of years old and this knowledge has been around in humans forever. Well, I would suspect that the older the knowledge is, the more heavily we should scrutinize it, right? Because
Yes.
it was potentially discovered during a time of great ignorance, right? And so it might be something that we're just holding on to. But I think what you're saying has some validity potentially, in the sense that when knowledge gets passed down from generation to generation, even wrong knowledge continues to be perpetuated. Like we don't filter every new generation. We don't filter our data. Like, okay, what needs to go for this next generation? We just kind of lump it all together and pass it along. So I do agree that there's a degree to that, a degree of truth to that. But I also think whether it's new knowledge or old knowledge, we have a tendency to believe false things. Like we have a tendency to want to believe all these different spiritual claims. And it's interesting because even whether a person's like a Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Wicca, or just a spiritualist that believes in just generally that there's a spiritual realm out there without adhering to a specific code or belief system, that propensity to do that is still within us. So even if astrology was only like a decade old, or whether it's thousands of years old, it has power, I don't think because of its age necessarily, but because of our tendency to hear something that sounds good or sounds right or sounds like it explains our reality in a way that's acceptable to us, and then we just believe it.
You know, this kind of reminds me of how people want there to be some sort of higher power or spiritual aspect to our physical world. And it makes me think of how, evolutionarily speaking, we look for hierarchy in what's the word? We look for structure, like a hierarchical. I can never say that word. Yes. So if we consider ourselves at the top, there's this natural nagging to want something to follow. Most of us are I would say followers, less of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us are. So it makes sense to me that we would want something to have meaning that we could just latch onto that doesn't come from ourselves. So astrology makes sense in that regard, to fulfill that sort of pseudo need.
That's kind of a good point, that like it seems that knowledge has to come from outside of us. Like if we discover it, then it doesn't have the same impact on us than if it comes from outside of us. And I'm saying broadly, like because so many people have these different spiritual beliefs. So
Right.
I agree with what you're saying, that if you were to say this comes from a god, or this is like, or the universe is conscious, or this or that impacts us on a spiritual level, somehow that makes us feel like, interestingly, instead of making us feel small and insignificant, which it would make me feel, it tends to make us feel more important and more grounded and more validated. I mean, I think that's
that makes sense, because it's almost like when I just had the thought, my ADHD took over.
Oh, that happens all the time. I can't even tell you how many times in the show I'm like, and I lost my point.
Yeah, 0.2 seconds after I think about
it. While you're thinking, I just want to ask Raymond if he's aware of. I mentioned earlier while you were away about the skies of southwest Scotland, particularly Dumfries and Galloway, being one of the best places to kind of view the night sky from in Britain. Are you aware of that?
To be honest, anywhere away from the bigger cities, there's not an awful lot of light pollution here, because there's not very many of us to start with. But yeah, if you go further up north, That's the Arctic when it's round the corner, so the skies are a lot more
That
cloudy.
is pretty impressive. I've been up in Durness in the middle of winter, laying out under the stars with maybe a spliff or two on the go. It is pretty impressive. Back in my younger days.
So
Oh, I go very
now that
often.
we've got all four of us back, we can start to talk maybe a little bit more moving toward modern astrology and kind of the impact it has on everybody. I know that's what I had promised before the commercial break, and we kind of got off on a little tangent, got into astronomy a little bit. And the two are pretty dang closely related. I mean, obviously they're two completely different fields, but they both deal with how we process our knowledge of the stars, whether we give it a spiritual aspect or whether we're just describing what we see in scientific terms. But what I'm interested to hear from you guys about is modern astrology. And I know we've said this multiple times on this very episode where it's like, why do people still believe this stuff? What does it look like today? Like, what is your guys' exposure to it? What are your understandings of what it looks like today and how it impacts people's lives?
Real quick. I think that a lot of what goes into the modern interpretations of astrology are co-opted from, like you said, scientific roots. Like
Mhm.
you hear people in the astrology community use the term energy.
Mm.
Now, energy is, according to my understanding, is a mathematical term.
Yep.
So it just describes a system of particles, essentially. Just whether they're moving fast, slow, heat, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Energy doesn't have much to do with, at least in a spiritual context. I don't get it. I don't get what, because I have a friend who is about astrology. They're about crystal healing,
Mm.
and they tell me that crystals can store energy, and I press them on that a little bit. I'm like, what do you mean when you're talking about energy? Can you define your terms for me, because I have a different understanding, and I never get anywhere really concrete. I don't have any solid answers from them. So
Yeah, I've had the same experience. I mean, astrology just seems like it's like the meme equivalent of a laugh track in Scotland. It's for some reason millennials seem to be really into it, and I mean from my perspective, it's just you could replace it with anything. You could replace it with Oscar Wilde quotes and somehow
Mhm.
make it relevant to your life. It's
So
it's
that's
much
like,
more trendy than following an ancient book of, like a lot of people my age, because I'm 26. A lot of people my age have moved away from traditional religious views
Mhm.
and have gone for this more new age, paganism, witchcraft, that kind of thing, because it feels more connective to them.
Does it
For
feel
me
more
personally,
personal and less judgy?
more personal,
Yeah, more
less,
validating.
yeah.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting question or maybe statement. I'm not sure how I'm going to propose this, but so we have like the whole rise of the nuns thing, like people leaving religion or leaving Christianity specifically in higher and higher numbers. They're not necessarily, from what I understand, leaving superstitious thought or spiritual belief. They're just really leaving the more structured um play by these specific rules type organizations, but they're still maintaining a lot of spiritual thinking and filling in the gaps of their knowledge with their own sort of this is my personal spiritual belief, whether it's like Wicca based or astrology based or another form of like Christianity light or something like that, where they're redefining Christianity in their own way.
Yep.
I think that kind of answers Richard's question for the validity of astrology is right now it's filling a gap in these people's lives of like, I want something more than just the concrete. And I have this tendency to want to believe in something spiritual. And maybe, and this is just a hypothesis or maybe a question about what you guys think, maybe it's because it has so many ties to science and people are looking more for, hey, it has to sound like people have higher standards, it seems like now for, I'm still going to believe bad or wrong things, but I want them to be a little more nuanced. I want them to be a little more scientific sounding in order for me to accept them, right?
I
Well, sure.
I push
There's
back a little bit on that because not because you're wrong, but from my experience, I've not like all three of you have said, oh, it's like people are like grasping onto it, millennials. I don't know a great many people who are into astrology at all. I certainly don't know any young people who are into astrology. The only people I know of even vaguely influenced by it are in the 60s, and they're also prone to bad thinking in other areas.
Mhm.
So they're prone to the kind of into ghosts, they're into mediumship and anti-vax stuff. They're the
Mhm.
kind of people I experience who think astrology is legitimate, and it's nothing to do with the kind of sciencey language of it. I don't disagree that it uses sciencey language,
Yeah.
but the people I'm aware of who are into it aren't into it because of that reason. So I'm really interested in this kind of this idea that a lot of
Yeah.
younger people are jumping onto it because of that. So I'm going to shut up now and let you tell me all about it.
No, that's why I was confused whether I should pose it as a question or a statement, because it was just sort of something that popped into my head based on what Kyle was saying. But it would be interesting to know the demographics, first of all, because we don't have that in front of us. We're just kind of guessworking it here. So yeah, I don't think we can really say with any certainty that X number of this age group are into this specific spiritual belief.
Yeah,
But it
no,
does,
I only know a few people who are like this. They just happen to be my age.
yeah, and I was going to just second what Kyle said, is the people who I do happen to know that are into astrology, um, they are 30s and late 20s ish. I don't know any older
Oh.
people who are. The older people that I know tend to either be non-religious or tend to be incredibly religious. But they tend to be more into the Christian, or I also know a lot of Muslim people, and so they would be actually anti-astrology. The older generations that I know would push back against astrology, whereas the younger people that I know are those who do accept it in my life do tend to be younger. So I guess it might be an exposure thing.
I think a lot of this comes from people wanting meaning that isn't given to them by themselves. You know,
Yeah.
they think that, and this is my experience back when I was still spiritual, that I didn't just want the meaning in my life to be ascribed by me. I wanted it to come from somewhere else, to know that there is meaning out there. I just have to find it. Like it's a quest.
Yeah.
It's a journey. So
It's true. I mean, humans, well, for the most part, are quite narrative creatures anyway. You're constantly trying to explain your life with the past, the present, the future, your goals, your expectations. It's easy to get bogged down in a lot of this crap. And astrology, it seems to have this weird ability to, what's the word? Sort of condense it down into sort of like a little peaceful thing. You know, like, oh, you've been out drinking 4 or 5 times a week because you're stressed at work, and suddenly, well, Jupiter's here now, so you're going to get some extra good fortune. It's comforting. It's no different from religion in that regard, I suppose.
That's kind of true for how complex it is for the person who's reading it or determining these horoscopes. It's asininely simple to the person receiving it. And so you're right, it kind of like dumbs down all the stuff that you have in your life down to simple things that you can kind of focus on and either be hopeful about or put it into perspective, right? Like if it is something bad, it's like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It's the universe. I just got to get through this, right? And if it's something good, it's like, well, I can latch onto that and take hope from that, even if it's a load of bullshit. It takes the onus off the individual and puts it out to the universe. Like it projects it onto somewhere else.
you know, I actually have a secular definition for spirituality.
Ooh, let's hear it.
So spirituality to me is the feeling of awe and wonder that I get from participating in a life, on a planet, in a universe, and actively seeking that feeling to fulfill a mental need.
I love that. Yeah. And
That's pretty good.
I think that astrology certainly produces that feeling in some people. I think religion does as well. So it's kind of cool to be able to take that feeling that we experience and to sort of secularize it in a way. Like that is a human feeling. It's not a Christian feeling. It's not a Hindu feeling, or it doesn't come just from astrology or whatever your spiritual belief of choice is. It really comes from within ourselves and our chemical makeup, the way our brains are wired. Yeah. So I think I said that earlier in the show too, that like people who have that sort of need for a spiritual belief, or they feel comforted by it, or they feel sort of attached to it. I think that there's in them sort of this like need to have that feeling because it's really nice, right? But they don't understand that you can get that in a secular way too. Like I get
Yeah,
that
you can
feeling
get that.
all the time.
Yeah, from music, from being in nature, from
Yeah.
looking at the stars at night. That's for me anyway.
Yeah, and like I know Kyle posts a lot of pictures of his bonfire, and that like just staring into the flames and seeing how it's like controlled chaos, right? Like they're predictable but unpredictable at the same time, right? Like there's
I get the same feeling of joy from looking at Kyle's pictures of chili that he posts.
oh my gosh, that's pure transcendence right there, man. You don't need spirituality and astrology. You just need Kyle's chili.
I'm telling you, it's pretty good.
I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something. I got distracted by food, which is
I don't know.
not
I know we need
unusual
to
for me.
conclude somewhat soon, and we're coming up towards the end of the show. We still have a few more minutes, but I think a good way to go with this is what are some of the dangers? Because we talk a lot about the dangers of bad thought and about religion and superstition in general. We haven't really gotten into that with astrology. So maybe we can close the show out with that. Like, what do you guys perceive are some of the dangers? We have about maybe 5 minutes until we need to conclude.
Well, I got one real quick. A very obvious danger would be taking serious life advice from, star placement. Yeah, making life choices based on what a newspaper article says or what the new horoscope on your phone says. These are things that can be incredibly detrimental because they're not choices that you're making using your logical faculties. It's putting faith in something that isn't yourself. And I think as people living a human experience, our own choices are what's going to be best for us, not something that is given to us by some mystical place in the sky.
There's a really good example of that, actually. It's an old Fresh Prince of Bel-Air episode. It's one of the clients of Uncle Phil or Shredder or whatever you want to call him. A really superstitious guy, and I can't remember what Will Smith does. He says something about lucky underwear, and the guy seen a red car on his way into work and somehow ends up losing like $1.7 million and stuff like that. It's a cheesy joke example, but it sort of fits into what Kyle was saying there. If you put a lot of stock into this stuff and make decisions on your life about it, it's eventually you're going to fuck it up, like quite badly.
And even worse is if you put your faith in these choices and they don't pan out, and that starts to break down your view of what was true. That can be mentally damaging.
Yeah.
True. And I also wonder how often when people do see these things as being true and then it's proved not true, how often they even realize it. Like I know there was twice in my life where I went back when I did have spiritual beliefs where I put stock in. It wasn't a horoscope specifically, but it was one was a candle, like you burn different kinds of candles for different kinds of to bring in different kinds of energy into your life, and I thought that was validated. And then the other one was sort of like I don't know, it was I guess like a wish spell type thing that one of my friends was like, "Oh, you should try this." And in both cases, I got something out of it that I thought I wanted. And then in hindsight later, it's like, it was first of all the candle that I burned, that what ended up coming out of it ended up ultimately being negative in the long run. And the other one was the exact opposite. What I thought was going to be the conclusion ended up not being the conclusion. And I can get more into those later, but since we're coming up to the end of the show. But when those things were proven wrong further down the road, I never ever went back and reflected on them until afterward. Like post spiritual belief, Laura would go back and reflect on them and be like, wow, that was some serious bullshit. But at the time, I had my belief validated in that moment. And then later on down the road, when it was actually technically invalidated, my mind didn't even recognize it, didn't pick up on it, didn't reflect on it, wasn't even thinking about it, right? So there was no point of invalidation. So maybe that person who prays, should I buy this house or not? Or the astrology reading says you should make this financial decision, and then they do it. And it ends up maybe 5 years down the line, they foreclose or the house burns down or something like that. Do they even take the time to reflect on that decision? Like chances are probably not.
And it's just like what you said earlier about counting the hits and ignoring the misses. That's exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's I've said this countless times over the episodes of the show, but that the danger is not so much the thing itself, it's what it exposes you to.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have a very innocent passing interest in astrology, and just read your stars in the daily rag, and like not put too much emphasis on it, but still believe it, but that still opens you up to poor thinking, and that might have no negative influence on your life. But when that con man comes calling and he's using those same subtle techniques, that's when the difficulties start to arise.
Yeah, because then you
Just
start
guard
talking
your
about
thinking.
you start talking about how many thousands people have spent on things like those famous psychic mediums on TV or those big mega churches.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, where it's like now because you have that bad thinking and now this person is speaking your language and like, oh, God requires this, or oh, you're spiritual, like your grandmother is telling me from the other side that, right? They get swindled out of so much money. And that's not even like the least of it, but yeah,
You
Kyle, what were
know,
you gonna say?
I was actually a victim of that. Have you guys ever heard of the TV preacher named Peter Popoff?
Yeah, oh, pop off. Yeah. See, I'm a big
Yeah,
fan of oh, what's his name? He just recently passed away. Randy, the amazing Randy.
Amazing Randy.
Yes.
He exposed Peter Popoff. And that
Yeah,
guy
he
should
did.
have gone to jail and didn't. He just ended up building a new organization with a new batch of bullshit.
Yeah, I was one of the victims of his scam bullshit with the whole water, the magical spring water that he would send to you. Because
Yeah.
I was little, my mom was sick. I wanted to help her in some way, and I still believed that. So I sent out for that magical spring water.
Oh,
Of course, never received anything because you have to first send money. They send you an envelope, you send them money. They send you another envelope, you send them money. Then they send you the water.
wow.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
complete trash.
That is a really good
And
example of how bad thinking can negatively impact you. And as a
right,
kid, you're like, I'm gonna, cure my mom or whatever. And
yep,
that water's literally not doing anything.
nope.
And that's a good demonstration as well that when we're talking about bad thinking, we're not just talking about kind of delusional adults. We're
We're
all
passing on
prone
to
to
our
it.
children. Yeah.
It's part of the human kind of condition. It's you're not bad. Because I think a lot of times when we do these shows and we talk about people who believe this have bad thinking, those people might listen to that and think, well, no, I'm not stupid, I'm not dumb. No one's saying you're stupid. We're all prone
We're
to it. Every
conditioned.
single
Yeah.
one of us were conditioned to it. What the challenge is to try and educate yourself out of it. And it takes a long time and a lot of practice. And we're still all prone to it. Even just the basic psychology of walking down the street, we get tricked by things.
And
Our minds are tricked all the time.
And that is why astrology still exists, to answer
Yeah.
anyone's question. Okay, we have less than 3 minutes. So in 30 seconds or less, each of you gentlemen, I'm not going to give myself or Richard this privilege this time because we spent a lot of time talking in general. What are your guys' closing thoughts on astrology specifically? And we'll start with you, Kyle.
Well, I suppose astrology has been very prevalent in the lives of many people, especially young people nowadays in our country. I just think that it would be more beneficial to learn from a scientific perspective what stars are rather than ascribing your own personal meaning to them, because like we said, some of these ideas can lead to harmful behaviors, harmful decisions and choices. So just keep being skeptical. Don't listen to any one star.
I love it. Ascalon, what are your closing thoughts?
To be honest, Kyle put it pretty succinctly there. If you just think about it, just don't just go along with it for the sake of it. Everything's supposed to sound nice. That's how they get you. Just think.
Yeah. And I always like to say the truth holds up to scrutiny. So if you scrutinize and it's true, what's the big deal? Okay, actually, Richard, since I went and took that last thought, I'll give you a last thought too.
I'm just mirroring what everybody else has said. I just want to say thank you to Ascalon and Kyle for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Yes,
They're going to be back with us next week. So look forward to that, where we're going to be talking about something not astrology related, but in fact astronomy. So
yes, we're going to switch gears from astrology to astronomy. Yeah.
So this is going to be really interesting. So you're back. We're going to have two bearded, bespectacled guests again next week.
I love it. Okay, yes, I second that. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you listeners for doing your listening. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Facebook. In the meantime, we are Laura
Richard
and Kyle and
Kyle
Ascalon.
and Ascalon.
Yeah.
and entirely rehearsed. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
I almost did some research and then I thought, fuck it.